Welcome back to Public Speaking at Motlow College. We're working on Chapter 4, talking about listening. I want to ask you, when was the last time you gave someone your undivided attention? You turned off your phone, you weren't thinking about what you were going to do after your conversation with them, you weren't thinking about how you ought to reply to them, but you were just sitting and listening to what they were saying to you, really absorbing. It's a beautiful gift that you can give someone, and I appreciate Julian Treasure kind of bringing it into the forethought, into the forefront of the minds of the people of TED, the important thinkers of our time. Because listening is a way for us to find common ground, a way for us to feel deeply understood. We all have a human need to be understood and to feel like people understand us. So when you listen to someone, you're giving them a gift. And I want to encourage you as your homework, of course I have no way of knowing this, but to take the time to either sit down with a cup of coffee with someone or call someone that you haven't talked to in a while that you truly care about and give them the gift of your undivided attention, because your desire to listen to them really can show that you care. So Julian Treasure kind of skipped through one part towards the end of his speech. Remember, they only get a certain amount of time, and I wanted to take just a moment to unpack that because it's a pretty important concept. Active versus passive listening. Now you can think of, I'm going to go over 3 different listening positions, and you can think of them all as a continuum. So on the far left you have active listening, and on the far right you have passive listening. So someone who's actively listening might be nodding their head, smiling, agreeing, saying nice little thoughts like, oh, okay. And that shows a sense of interest. Now, if you're listening too actively, you're interrupting, you are anticipating what someone's going to say and saying it for them, that kind of active listening is going too far in the active direction. Now, passive listening could also go too far into silence, and people don't know that you're even listening at all, but maybe you are. So we want to find the middle of active versus passive. Reductive listening. This is where you're listening in order to come to one conclusion. Men tend to be problem solvers, not to gender stereotype, but men, you tend to listen to an entire conversation and come away with, okay, here's how we're going to fix the situation, rather than taking in all of the nuance or the complications of a scenario. So I might have a conversation where I come home with to my husband, and I tell him about this conversation that I had with my sister, and I go into all of the nuance, and then he simplifies it into a way to fix the problem. And that might be a reductive way of listening, hearing and summarizing it down into something simplistic. An expansive listener may hear things that you didn't even say. So say my husband comes home from work and says, I'm tired, and then all of a sudden say, I think, he goes back to his room and closes the door. I think, oh no, he's tired. He's tired of me. He's tired of our life together. He's going to leave me. I've created all of these imaginary things that he didn't say. Now, female intuition is sometimes something to be celebrated, because we can often kind of our emotional intelligence tell what people are kind of saying between the lines, maybe something they didn't say out loud. But once again, it's a continuum. You maybe want to hear things that people didn't say out loud, but you don't want to expand so much on what they said that you're hearing things that they didn't say. You don't want to be so reductive that you're oversimplifying their message. So, something to think about. Where on the continuum? You want to kind of figure out for yourself, where do you stand on these continuums, and then try to get yourself back to center. If you know you're a reductive listener, maybe pay more attention to those details. If you know you're an expansive listener, maybe harness your imagination and discipline your mind. So think about where you are. Critical listening. Some of you are just naturally more critical, more judgmental. If the magazine salesman knocks on the door, you don't even open it. You go back and lock it. If you're maybe too empathic, you invite him in for dinner, right? So, are you judging someone before you hear them out, or are you maybe overly empathetic? Are you listening and agreeing with things that aren't true or aren't right? We all need to be discerning people. We need to be critical of what we hear in order to digest it and figure out if it's true. So once again, kind of a balance there between judging and empathizing. So I hope you enjoyed Julian Treasure's talk. I think he's very inspirational, and his research is exciting to follow. So we are in your book in chapter 4 on page 59, listening versus hearing. He kind of talks, Julian Treasure sort of spoke about listening and hearing as if they were interchangeable. And it is true. If you can't listen, if you can't hear, if you have bad hearing, it's going to be very hard for you to listen. But listening and hearing in our book is two different things, once again on page 59. So even the best listeners, somebody hired by the CIA to tap your phone and record your conversations, they can only listen intermittently. Even the most disciplined minds can only listen intermittently. We can only hear, half of what you say, really 75% digested. So, it's not a continuous process. Whereas we hear everything if we have good hearing. It's continually hearing, but listening, actually digesting or engaging content, we can only do that intermittently. So don't be too hard on yourself about your listening capabilities. Listening is something active. It's something that you choose to engage yourself in. It's something that you make an active choice to participate in. Whereas hearing is something passive, right? We've all had somebody wake us up in the middle of the night accidentally because we passively heard them, blaring their speakers as they drove by. Listening is something that we do intentionally. And that's one reason that, as your book says, we ought to really teach it in schools, teach kids how to listen, because it's something that they have to discipline their mind. They have to be intentional about wanting to listen. They need to be motivated. This is for those of you who are going into public education. I don't want to discourage you, but it's really hard to motivate someone who doesn't want to listen, who doesn't care. You can't make someone listen. You can make someone hear if they're in your proximity, but you can't make someone listen. Listening is a choice. And hearing is not necessarily a trained activity. It's something that you can do passively and just receive. So, turning over the page, over to page 60. So, first we receive that symbol. We get a stimulus, like we talked about in chapter 1. We take in the message. And then we select, we focus on it, right? And then we interpret it. So we attach a meaning to that symbol that we have. And then we integrate the message into our frame of understanding or our frame of reference. And then we evaluate and judge the information based on its merit, based on the credibility of the person speaking, based on our particular worldview. And then we decide what we want to do with that information. So one thing to remember here, as the quote says, people generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for, because there is a certain amount of interpretation that goes into listening. You're always going to filter it through what many academics call your worldview, your perspective on the universe, your perspective of reality. Not to get too hippy-trippy, but we all have these paradigms that we live in, whether it be our religion or our political stance or our values that we have, and anything that comes into our world, we have to make sense of it by relating it to something else. So there's a certain amount of interpretation and understanding and evaluating that falls on the burden of the listener to kind of go through any message and receive it. Now, evaluation is a step that we really need to look twice at, judging the merits of the information. Aristotle says it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. So just because you're sitting and listening to a speech, remember we talked about those listening positions at the very beginning, we don't want to be too empathic. Just because someone looks like a nice person doesn't mean that they're not a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So we don't want to just accept everything that everybody says. We need to be able to entertain any idea. What often happens in our modern world, unfortunately, is we have such divided aisles. We have Democrats versus the Republicans, and just because a Republican says it, the Democrat is not going to vote for it. Just because someone who's on the us of the them, we're not going to even entertain their thoughts. And unfortunately, when we're trying to build up a culture, when we're trying to work together to create something meaningful, we need some cooperation across the aisle. So we don't always want to stick our fingers in our ears and la 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 to any opinion that we already have some sort of preconceived notion about. I would challenge you to sort of open yourself and open your mind to these speeches, because people may have valid points. So at least take a moment to entertain the idea of what they're saying, even if you already know that you already have a firm stance in the current issue that they're talking about. You still want to try to open yourself up and be receptive. And then if you come to the conclusion after entertaining the thought that you do not want to accept it, that's fine. But I just want to challenge you to always give intelligent people the benefit of the doubt and take a moment to really try to open yourself up. So, well, we all know that it's not easy to listen. College students used to spend about 60% of your day sitting around listening to we professors and to each other, to your television or to your radio, and it can be very difficult, and I'm not saying that it isn't, but let's talk about some ways that you can be intentional about overcoming the obstacles. Physical distractions. Some of you right now, as you're listening to this lecture, you maybe have your phone out, you've got your dog at your feet, you've got the TV on, maybe even in the background, you're trying to watch a kid. There's all sorts of physical distractions in the space. It can be noise, it can be the weather or the temperature in the room. It can be the smells. Maybe you're hungry and dinner is cooking. So try as much as you can when you're having a very important conversation to eliminate physical distractions. And the same is true when you're giving a speech. Try not to create physical distractions. I've had students play music the entire time that they're talking as an undercurrent to their speaking. And that was a physical distraction that people who were hard of hearing really had a hard time overcoming. So try to minimize physical distractions. And when you have those important conversations, turn off your phone. Send the kid to the neighbor. As much as you can, get rid of physical distractions. Physiological distractions. And this has to do with what's going on in your own body, right? Right now, I'm pregnant. I'm growing a human. It can be very distracting to have him kicking around in there when I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody else, but he's worth it. That's fine. But maybe you're sick. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're hungry. Psychological distractions. This is perhaps the biggest one for most of us. We're too busy worrying about ourselves. We're too busy worried about how we're coming off or our ego. And it can be hard to put away all of the baggage from the day or from last night, or put away all of those emotions and really focus on the moment, right? As much as you can, try to be in the moment. Don't listen to those attitudes or preoccupations or worries. Semantic distractions. This has to do with rhetoric and the word choices that we use and why word choice is so important. Because sometimes we don't exactly know what the word you chose means. So maybe take a moment just to say you're going to talk about something important like human trafficking. Human trafficking can basically be divided into two areas. It usually happens to immigrants, and either people are working for no money for a sort of person whose exploitation of their labor because he knows they don't have a green card, or sex trafficking, right? Human trafficking can happen in the way of, people who are prostituting or are sex slaves here. And so when you use the word human trafficking, sometimes we create words like that or use words like that to sort of gloss over ugly truths. And this can happen particularly in politics. We need to be careful about our semantics, and sometimes we need to use the uglier words because they're more clear, right? Sometimes we need to go ahead and say prostitute rather than human trafficking, because when you say the word human trafficking, everybody might not know what you're talking about. So don't be so worried about offending your audience that you're not clear. Clarity is so important. You've probably heard before in a conversation when people are fighting, when they're saying, oh, this is just semantics. We're talking about the same things, but we're just saying it different ways. And that can be true. Sometimes people are just not understanding, not listening to each other because the word choices are getting in the way. Like we talked about in the first lecture, words are frustrating and cursed. So here are some things that I can kind of practical advice, just to reminders, ways for you to listen better. Listen for the main ideas. Some of you can get lost in the forest for the trees. You're so busy trying to focus on so many facts, especially in situations where facts are overwhelming, such as a World Civ class, when they're telling you battle dates and big people's names, and you just get overwhelmed by facts that you forget to listen to the main ideas. Remember what we said about not being able to hear or listen to every single point that somebody's making. So if you focus in on the main ideas, you're going to have a better luck at understanding what somebody is saying. And one of the useful tips there is tone, hearing the tone of what the speaker is saying. If you're taking notes, be flexible. Now, in most of my class, when you're listening to other speeches, you're not going to be taking notes. But if you're, for example, writing notes while a professor is talking, it may not be reasonable for you to write down every word that's on a professor's slide. Sometimes that just can't happen. Sometimes we have deadlines and we need to get through our content faster. And, I always try to put the page number there for you to cross-reference. Look for the keywords, write down the keywords, rather than trying to be a stenographer and take down every single word that we're saying. Because what you're going to end up doing is spending so much time writing that you're not really hearing. Now, if you're like me, writing things down helps you to remember it. And so I'm going to try, as the presenter, to always slow down and let you write. I'm going to watch for your feedback. I'm going to see how quickly you're writing and try to pause and work with you in that. But we can only do that to a certain extent, because otherwise, while you're sitting there scribing every word, 15, 20 other people are waiting for the next slide. So be flexible. Write down those main ideas. Go to your friend after class and say, can I get your notes from such and such? She was just moving too fast for me in that point. But don't be so quick, so busy writing things down that you forget to listen. Judge the content, not the delivery. This can be very difficult in a beginning speaking class, because you'll see people who are stumbling over their words. You'll see people who are rocking back and forth or have a repetitive gesture, and you're learning all of these things, and you can be quick to dismiss their message just because of their distracting way of presenting. And it can be one of the curses of intelligent people, that they maybe have their content, but they don't know how to share it as well as they could. As I put on your syllabus the first day, the TED speeches, a lot of them are really good content, but they are not always the best at delivering that content, because for one reason or another, they're not as smooth as delivers, but that doesn't mean that we should discount their message. So try, especially in the classroom environment, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Try not to be distracted if they have something in their teeth. Try to focus on their message. So we talked about those critical voices. Some of you are going to hear a word and it's going to completely turn you off to that person's presentation. You're going to dismiss them. Someone stands up to talk about a hot button issue, something like abortion. You already know where you stand on that and you're going to want to dismiss them completely. But maybe they have a nuance of the issue that you've never thought about. Maybe they have a personal story that you can at least empathize with on a human level, even if you don't agree with them politically. So avoid being too dismissive without taking the time to really invest in someone's story. You may have heard of a fair weather friend, a friend who's only around for the good times and isn't there for the bad times. And I would challenge you not to be a fair weather listener. Some of you will listen all day to their humorous anecdote, but when they start sharing about their battle with childhood cancer, it can be a little bit more difficult to stay there with them and to be present with them in their pain, particularly if they're talking about something painful. Some of you will be tempted to check out emotionally, and I want to challenge you not to do that. Sometimes heaviness isn't emotional, sometimes heaviness is intellectual. They're going to take you to a place and it's going to feel like class. They're going to start talking about the history of World War II, and it's going to get intellectual and it's going to be challenging. And I want to challenge you to try to go there with your fellow classmates. This is something that they've invested their time in. You never know what you could learn or how they could broaden your perspective of history. So don't shy away from the heavy stuff. Don't be a fair weather listener. Now, it is my job to get you to speak publicly. That's my primary goal. But I also have sneaky back motives. And one of them is to improve your relationships with your other persons, your friends, your family, your significant other. So there's a new question in the leadership realm, and that is, what is your emotional intelligence? If you're going into business, I would challenge you to go Google this term and start thinking about emotional intelligence. And it has to do with your intuition. Can you feel other people out? Are you intuitive about what they're experiencing? Are you able to kind of gauge the room when you walk into it? Because emotional intelligence will predict particularly your ability to lead in any given situation. If you're not savvy to their body language, if you're not savvy to their attitudes, then you may not be as successful as you would otherwise. So, one of the biggest gifts that you can give the person that you're listening to, and Julian Treasure touched on this, but is by repeating back to them a summary or a paraphrase of what they just said. This is so helpful in conflict resolution. If you're having a fight with someone and they're saying, I just feel like I'm doing all of the work around here. And so maybe you take a second to say, so what I hear you saying is that you need me to contribute more to the household. Just to take a moment like that to let them know that you hear what they're saying. Like I said, most people in any given conflict want to be understood. That's a huge need, that they feel heard, feel acknowledged, feel recognized in their pain. And if you can give that gift back to them of just being able to say, this is what I hear, it'll go a long way towards resolving that conflict. Ask relevant questions, inquire, take the time to really dig deeper and specify and clarify. Do you mean this? Do you mean that? Now, of course, given the conflict, given the tone of the conversation, sometimes it's better to just listen, which kind of takes me to my next one. Don't interrupt. If you get the feeling, if your emotional intelligence is telling you this person needs to just keep talking for a little while. But that can be a way of showing concern, is to get in there and to kind of clarify exactly what's going on. But there are times when asking relevant questions can really show a sense of engagement. This one cannot be overstated. Pay attention to your body language, especially in conflict and especially in dealing with children, because they're going to see your body language, and that's going to be just as important to them as your words that are coming out of your mouth. They think very visually, children do, but so do adults. Really, we do. So when you're in class and someone is giving a speech, I want you to think about this. Am I leaning back with my arms crossed and I'm just completely look bored? How is that discouraging to the person in the front of the room? Maybe it's a good time to lean forward in your seat, to sit up, to smile. Those sorts of visual feedback for your audience can be very encouraging for them. In conflict resolution, sometimes we as negotiators ask the participants to put their hands palm up on the table or in front of them. And what that body language just says is, I'm open and receptive to reaching some sort of conclusion. I'm open and receptive. Our bodies, once we start to feel threatened, they start to close off. We tighten our mouth, we cross our arms, and we disengage. But a good body language is open and it's engaging. So really use your eye contact effectively. It can be seen as confrontational with certain people, so you have to beware and feel out that person about eye contact engagement. Particularly if you have someone with Asperger's, or someone who doesn't like to be too directly confronted, someone who's been a sufferer of abuse in the past. So you just want to be, toe that line between aggressiveness and passiveness. All right, so that brings us to the conclusion of our listening section. I hope that you have a new respect for listening. I hope that you take it seriously. I truly believe that you will get so much out of being a good listener. You will be able to engage in the reality around you rather than this sort of social media reality that we put up, I think, sometimes, but really putting down the technology and looking someone face to face and really taking the time to engage in what's really going on with them. You're going to get deeper relationships. You're going to have more opportunities to be understood yourself. So, especially those of you who are in long-term relationships, I really think that listening is key to creating and keeping that sense of understanding and cooperation. Of course, it's important to this class. Remember, you are evaluated in class. If I see you doing anything distracting on your phone, sleeping, if you're not listening in class, that's going to negatively affect your grade. So we want to keep your listening standards high for the course as well. Although I am sure that many of you will do a great job of listening in class, and hopefully you'll reap the benefits of that. As always, thank you for listening.